The Red Bull RB20 finally hit the track in full view of the watching world on the first day of Formula 1 2024 pre-season testing in Bahrain, and there was plenty of wow factor on show now that Red Bull can't so easily hide details with edited renders or a carefully controlled display of the car. Although Red Bull had the real car on display at its Milton Keynes launch and images from its Silverstone shakedown had already emerged, this was the first time we've had a clear look at the car from all angles with nothing covered up. And while the basic shape is as was originally revealed, there's some spectacular detail on show. What's more, the race grabbed a look at the parts Red Bull don't want us to see, with a glimpse under the bodywork. And the interest wasn't restricted to those eye-catching side pods, as we also finally saw the real floor and the full extent of the intricate work Red Bull has done on this spectacular car. If it goes even half as good as it looks, it's going to be the car to beat. When the RB20 was launched in Milton Keynes, a combination of the lighting and not being able to get right next to the car made it difficult to see exactly what was going on at the front of the side pods. The heavily disguised renders hardly proved illuminating on that front. The big question mark was that cooling inlet arrangement at the front of the side pod and how it was configured. When the car hit the track in Bahrain, we could see that it comprises a shallow letterbox-shaped inlet at the top of the side pod combined with a narrow vertical one hugging the edge of the monocoque. That raised new questions, in particular why Red Bull has done this unusual arrangement. First and foremost, it's not because it's recreating the infamous Mercedes Zero side pod, but we'll come back to that idea later. While the letterbox inlet high in the side pod is conventional enough, if small, the vertical duct is trickier to be clear on. Our resident ex-F1 technical director Gary Anderson has suggested the total area of these two inlets combined looks like it will be bigger than what Red Bull had running just the standard horizontal side pod inlet on its 2023 car. Any air used for cooling can't be used to generate downforce, so there must be a performance reason for this. Anderson's suggestion is that the vertical duct could be there to help control the boundary layer buildup on the side of the monocoque. The idea there is that this bleeds the airflow off the side of the chassis into the inlet and allows the high energy airflow to continue around the side of the car. If you don't control the boundary layer buildup, it will effectively make the chassis wider in that area than it really is and reduce the mass airflow and the airflow velocity in that crucial side pod undercut area. That's because, in simple terms, the bigger the boundary layer, the greater the friction and the less energised the downforce generating airflow becomes. As for where the airflow taken into the duct is going, that's impossible to say for sure. F1 cars today have external bodywork but also internal bodywork, and it will be incorporated into the cooling regime somehow. Whatever happens, it's an unexpected step from Red Bull, but given this is a team that has dominated F1 recently, it will likely have been done for very good reasons. While we cannot exactly track where that vertical duct goes, we have been able to see under the bodywork of the new Red Bull. Gary Anderson has picked out what he believes are the radiator cores, which cool the engine's water and oil systems. It's possible the lower one is an intercooler, which is fluid-to-fluid cooling, but still requires airflow to take heat out of the system. The radiator inlet duct is also clearly visible here. Overall, this gives you an impression of how aggressively everything is packaged in the side pod. It's also noticeable that Red Bull appears to have tightly packaged radiators, which supports the belief that the Honda power unit is believed to be the best on the grid in terms of its heat rejection characteristics. All of this is then clothed in the aerodynamic body surfaces, but what's noticeable is that the bodywork is not as tight as it could be. That's because it's not simply a case of shrink wrapping the internals as tightly as possible. The bodywork serves an aerodynamic purpose, and Red Bull has created plenty of opportunity to shape it as it wants for maximum performance. Get 15% off F1 TV Pro when you sign up using the link on screen before February 25th. Watch every session of the 2024 F1 season, plus highlights and reruns, along with documentaries, behind-the-scenes exclusives, interviews, and a rich archive of some of F1's most exciting races ever. Enjoy multiple camera views, live timing, and driver tracking information across multiple screens, just like an F1 team's pit wall. Offer only applies to territories where F1 TV Pro is available and excludes France, Netherlands, Monaco, Guadeloupe, Chile, and Austria. Terms and conditions apply. The new Red Bull is clearly a visually different car to last year's, and certainly an aggressive evolution. But it's not just going to stop here, it's going to be upgraded, and it's going to potentially look a little bit different. The question is, how different? How much more aggressive can Red Bull make the RB20? There's been a lot of excitement about the possibility of a car that already bears some resemblance to the last couple of Mercedes F1 cars getting an upgrade that creates something akin to the so-called Mercedes Zero pod. We're not sure it's going to go quite that far. Now that we've seen the car more clearly in 3 dimensions at testing, we can really understand and appreciate the detail and effort that has gone into redesigning such key parts of the car already, and by extension how big a job it would be to make a major change from here. The side pod inlet detail and the expanded undercut plus the big hulking shoulders on the engine cover are massive changes. This is a car with an awesome amount of detail on it already, underpinned by some pretty fundamental plumbing choices. What we're saying is this: Red Bull's side pods can shrink from here, certainly. This car could, amazingly, get more aggressive and more tightly wrapped around the side pods. There does seem to be a little bit more room to manoeuvre there. But is it going to be transformatively different? Is it going to be a Red Bull style zero pod? We're not convinced. This is very clearly a side pod, one being used for cooling and aerodynamic purposes. It serves a function on how the RB20 works, and as we've seen in the images so far, the internals of this car are significant and very complex. Shrinking all that further or relocating it would take an enormous upgrade. Our theory is that the Red Bull side pods could get tighter but are unlikely to disappear into zero pod territory. However, we're willing to be proven wrong, because that would be yet another colossal engineering feat on top of what Red Bull has already surprised us with so far. Another part of the car that was conspicuous by its absence at the launch was the fine detail on the edge of the floor. This is vitally important given how powerful the underfloor is, and what's interesting is Red Bull has revealed a subtle change of direction with its 2024 car in this area. Looking from overhead, the differences aren't too dramatic. Note the similar shape to the leading edge of the underfloor and the basic treatment of the floor edge. However, the more aggressive side pod undercut we've already talked about has created the opportunity to be more aggressive with the detail in this area. The outer turning vanes have doubled in number from 2 to 4. By having the bigger side pod undercut and these more aggressive vanes, that should allow more airflow to be pulled out from underneath the front corner of the floor. If you get this right, then the airflow feeding the underfloor is well managed and ensures the diffuser efficiency is maximised. That will work the underfloor harder. Seeing the car in Bahrain also confirmed some other key details. The nose was as it was on the launch car, so with bodywork connecting to the main plane of the front wing rather than the second element as it was last year. The nose tip is also flatter and wider. What you really all want to know is whether or not the Red Bull RB20 is quick. Well, testing times aren't worth a great deal, but the fact Max Verstappen topped the first day of running shows the car is no slouch. So not only did the car look the part, it was also fast. And not only was it fast, it was also reliable. Verstappen smashed through the 100-lap barrier easily on day one of testing, clocking up a final tally of 142 laps. While the lap times mean little, it's clearly an impressive start. The car didn't look the tidiest in the morning, either on camera or to our team watching from trackside. During one of Verstappen's early stints, he seemed unable to commit as he wanted to on turn-in and suffered from understeer mid-corner. However, it didn't take long for him to look more comfortable in the car, and he soon posted a time quicker than he managed on day one of last year's test. Verstappen's race engineer Gianpiero Lambiase couldn't help but grin when Verstappen went quickest by 0.8 in the late afternoon, and Verstappen went faster still with 26 minutes remaining to extend that advantage to more than a second over McLaren's Lando Norris. But the headline lap time isn't even the most impressive part. More important is that with such a different car visually and quite possibly aerodynamically given the changes, the mileage has allowed Verstappen and Red Bull to run through their plan without any obvious interruption. In short, if you're hoping the new car being so different would trip Red Bull up early on, that doesn't look like the case at all. It guarantees nothing for the rest of the test, let alone next week's race or the season as a whole, but it's as ominous a start to F1 2024 as Red Bull could have made.